Welcome to the Welding Safety Training Module. At the end of this module, you will be able to describe the different welding-specific personal protective equipment, describe why different filter plates are used, differentiate between the different welding types, and identify and describe different welding hazards. Welding is a very effective workplace technique used to fuse or cut metal, though it is not without dangers. Knowing the hazards of welding and following the correct procedures will help prevent personal injury, fatalities, and property damage. Welding safety is everyone's responsibility. It concerns not only the welder, but also those working in the vicinity of welding operations. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is crucial to being safe while welding. In order to provide the most benefit, PPE must fit properly. It should be comfortable and allow for freedom of movement. Always inspect your PPE for defects or damage prior to use. If PPE is defective or damaged, replace it immediately. This course will cover the following PPE: eye and face protection, ear protection, protective clothing, hand protection, and respiratory protection. Always wear approved safety glasses with side shields when welding, cutting, or grinding. In addition to eye protection, always wear an approved welding face shield. Welding face shields, or welding goggles, are specifically designed to protect against welding hazards and to resist hot splatter. They also have tinted visors to protect against dangerous arc rays. Sunglasses, safety goggles, or any other protective eyewear are not substitutes for proper welding-specific face protection. Different welding processes may require specialized lenses, known as filter plates, that are designed to protect against flash burns and eye damage by absorbing infrared and ultraviolet light. These plates are inserted inside the helmet into lens holders. Different colored lenses are also available to reduce the amount of white light and glare while welding. Welding can pose several dangers to a worker's hearing and ears. For example, air arc and plasma arc welding create high noise levels. If a worker is exposed to these noise levels continuously or intermittently, permanent hearing loss can occur. Proper hearing protection, such as ear plugs or ear muffs, can help to greatly reduce the risk of exposure to noise levels above acceptable decibel limits. Hearing protection also prevents hot sparks from entering the ear while welding or cutting. Wear the following protective clothing when welding or cutting: flame-resistant gauntlet gloves, leather or flame-resistant aprons, fire-resistant leggings or high boots, steel-toed shoes wherever heavy objects are handled. Avoid using low-cut shoes with unprotected tops because of the possible spark hazards. Capes or shoulder covers made of leather or other suitable material. Leather or flame-resistant skull caps, protective ear covers, and hard hats or other head protection. While welding, be sure to keep any body part that could potentially be exposed to the ultraviolet and infrared radiation covered to protect against skin burns. Also, wear dark-colored clothing instead of light-colored clothing to reduce the amount of reflection to the face. Fabrics such as wool or leather are safer than cotton because they are more resistant to deterioration from ultraviolet radiation. Wool does not ignite as readily as cotton, and better protects against temperature changes. Welding gloves should be heavily insulated, gauntlet-type gloves. They should be used for all types of welding, including gas tungsten arc, also known as TIG. Always wear gloves when handling metal, and assume that all metal is sharp and hot. Welding and cutting may generate toxic fumes. The fumes produced depend on the type of electrode used, the base metal being welded or cut, and whether or not the base metal is coated. To protect against these hazards, respiratory protection should be used. Respiratory protection includes local ventilation or a respirator. While working in confined spaces, use local exhaust or adequate general ventilation to keep airborne fumes below toxic levels. If ventilation cannot be provided, use a respirator to protect from toxic airborne materials. Arc welding is the act of fusing metal by using heat from an electric arc. The electric arc is generated by using a power supply to create an arc between an electrode and base material. Different varieties of arc welding include shielded metal arc, submerged arc, gas tungsten arc or TIG welding, gas metal arc or MIG welding, arc spot, and carbon arc welding. When performing any of these types of arc welding, be aware of hazards such as metal fumes from base metals, coatings, or electrode filler metal, such as welding rods, gases from electrode coating and flux, ultraviolet rays, ozone and nitrogen oxides, and alpha radiation and gamma radiation from thorium. Gas welding is the act of fusing metal by using heat from a gas flame and pressure. Gas welding can be performed with or without a filler metal. Types of gas welding include oxyacetylene, oxyhydrogen, oxygen propane, natural gas, and methyl acetylene propadiene. When performing any of these types of gas welding, be aware of hazards such as asphyxiation from high concentrations of fuel gases, explosiveness of fuel gases, particularly in confined spaces, and metal fumes from base metals, coatings, or electrode filler material. Brazing is the act of fusing metal by heating a filler metal above 800 degrees Fahrenheit, but below the melting point of the base metals. The filler metal distributes itself among the closely fitted surfaces of the joint by filling the spaces between the metals. Soldering is the same as brazing, except that the filler metal has a melting point below 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Brazing and soldering hazards include metal fumes from base metal, coatings, fillers, or solder, gases from fluxes like fluorides and other halides, and burns from contacting hot irons. Metal cutting is the act of cutting metal with the heat from a gas flame or electric arc. Metal cutting types include oxyacetylene, propane, natural gas, plasma arc, and air arc. When performing any of these types of metal cutting, be aware of hazards such as large quantities of metal fumes, fume particles with high velocity and a specific direction, intense ultraviolet light, ozone and oxides of nitrogen, and high noise levels. Exposure to fumes and gases can endanger workers while welding. Generally, welding fumes and gases can come from the following: the type of base and filler materials being used, shielding gas supplied from the cylinders, chemical reactions from the ultraviolet light generated by the arc, cleaners and degreasers, and MIG welding or TIG welding processes when the air is aimed directly at the welding zone and a loss of shielding results. To prevent overexposure prior to welding or cutting, ensure that there is sufficient ventilation to draw welding fumes away from the work area. If sufficient ventilation is not possible, use portable fume extraction equipment. Never weld or cut any metal with paint or any unknown coating on it, as it may produce a toxic fume. If you become dizzy or develop a headache or chest pains, stop welding or cutting and seek medical attention immediately. Welding and cutting operations produce hot spatter and streams of hot semi-molten metal. These sparks and hot globules can be projected up to 35 feet from the actual welding or cutting area. To reduce the risk of fire and explosions, ensure that the welding zone is free of combustible materials up to 35 feet. If you cannot move combustible materials, cover them up with special flame retardant covers. Welding operations that are necessary outside the welding area must have an authorized hot work permit. And post a fire watch on guard. This person should watch out for fires during and for 30 minutes after the welding operation. Another hazard is falling pieces of cut metal. Do not allow cut material to fall on your hoses, equipment, ladder, or lift. Never weld on barrels, drums, or piping, as they may explode even after they have been cleaned. Some welding and cutting processes can produce arc rays. Arc rays are ultraviolet, infrared, or visible light that can burn unprotected eyes and skin. Never look directly at an arc unless you are wearing a welding face shield. Other types of eye protection, including sunglasses, do not provide sufficient protection from arc rays. Always protect nearby personnel from arc ray exposure by using portable screens. Be sure to notify anyone in the area about the dangers of looking at the arc before starting any welding operations. Electric current flowing through a conductor causes electromagnetic fields, also called EMF. Prolonged exposure to EMF may have negative health effects. Individuals with a pacemaker should consult with their physician prior to electric arc welding or plasma cutting. Use the following safety procedures in order to minimize exposure to electromagnetic fields. Route the electrode and work cables together and secure them with tape whenever possible. Never coil the electrode lead around your body. Do not place your body between the electrode and work cables. If the electrode cable is on your right side, the work cable should also be on your right side. Connect the work cable to the work piece as close as possible to the area being welded. And do not work next to your welding power source. Electric welders can be injured or killed by an electric shock. If the welding operation must be performed on steel or other conductive materials, an insulating mat must be used under the operator. If the welding area is wet or damp, or if you are actively perspiring, wear rubber gloves under your welding gloves. If possible, welding operations should take place on fire brick or other non-flammable surfaces at a comfortable height. Be aware that some surfaces and clamps may absorb heat during welding and may become very hot. Welding should never be performed directly on a concrete floor. Heat from the arc can cause steam to build up in the floor, which could cause an explosion. Welding is an effective technique used to fuse or cut metal, though it is not without dangers. This course discussed the proper personal protective equipment that should be worn during welding, the hazards of the different types of welding processes, and the general hazards involved with welding. Knowing the hazards of welding and following the correct procedures will help prevent property damage, personal injury, and death.